I Oscar. I was amazing. Let me rephrase that. It was better than I thought I would do. I thought I'd do more. Okay, so moving on. Panic of 1893. Who was elected president in 1896? Ryan did not win. Yes. McKinley. What party was McKinley? What happened to the Populist Party? Gone. Most of them rolled into the Democrats, but it was really complex. The party, it was really fluid then. Not that it's not, the parties are really weak now, but they were just really fluid then. We have weak parties. Most people say they're independent. That means, by definition, weak parties. And what else we do? I know, oh, there's a bunch of effects that came out of this. First off, whose interests became more important after 1896? What part of the country, generically? Urban. Urban moneyed interests. To this day. And they'll get candidates to a campaign on rural and whatever that might be. But it's all urban. And next, what became more important than ever before? Money, money, money. Who gave $700,000 alone to Rockefeller's campaign?
Good job.
Who did Rockefeller give money to? McKinley. I knew I was going to say that. And I said it. All right. But this did open up to reform. What kind of idea of there needs to be some kind of reform of capitalism will come right after the populist movement? It was the first one on that list I gave you. The list I gave you 3 things about going for reform. Yeah, the progressives. The progressive movement, then we got the New Deal, and the last of, you could say, of that kind of era of presidents, Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. So we got to here. We got captive market. Did we get, what was Seward's Folly? Yeah, Alaska. And what did they discover there in 1898? Gold, yeah. So we got here, closing, we got this. We talked about this, right? Yeah, so the idea was we could trade off our surplus. So international trade off, if you're producing too much, find other people to buy it from. The problem is so is everybody else. They're doing the same thing. And that's why I showed this picture here of everyone else was putting up tariff walls. So there's an issue here with that. You find other people to buy your surplus. And exports definitely went up dramatically for the United States. This was a time of great world trade. The first real globalization, it was actually shocking. It wouldn't reach that period until the 1980s. By the way, out of the year 1914, what would end world trade? What's coming? Just a slight little apocalypse. And so with that, next, Alfred Thayer Mahan. Alfred Thayer Mahan would drive, everyone just called it the influence of sea power, even though technically it's the influence of sea power on history from 1660 to 1783. And he's talking about what makes countries great. That's what they called the most powerful countries, the great powers. And by that time, the great powers of the world, the United States had emerged into one. Britain, France. Anybody know the other countries? Russia was, even though they hadn't really begun the Industrial Revolution yet. They're just beginning. That's it, Britain, that's it, France. There's a brand new country called Germany that is growing in power shockingly fast. Italy really wanted to be. They weren't right there yet. Italy's very bitterly divided. Austria's a great power too. And one more new one. In the Pacific. Yeah. It went from being a medieval feudal state to being a great power in less than 50 years. Japan emerged on the scene like no country had. I mean, Germany is growing so fast it's hard for anybody to wrap their mind around. And Japan is even beating them. Well, in rate of growth, not in size. What made them great? Well, what power became great in these years? By the way, remember that's the year the United States signed the Treaty of Paris of 1783, becoming independent. But what country was becoming great? That's Britain. Great Britain. By then it's called the United Kingdom. They were becoming, by the way, I was watching a little bit of the Olympics. I was watching, of all things, curling. And which is really interesting thing in a weird way. But They're going by Great Britain and not United Kingdom. And I just, because your actual name is Great Britain, or is United Kingdom. It's absolutely technically not Great Britain. Hmm? Good guess, but it's still United Kingdom. I just thought that was interesting, not that it matters. So I quit watching Curly. It ruined the whole thing for me. But that's why they become great. And what made them great? Well, Mahan, who was a commander of the U.S. Navy, eventually became a rear admiral. He is looking at this, and he decides what made him great is trade, international trade. And remember mercantilism, more exports than imports. More exports than imports. Trade, bringing money in, that should fit in with mercantilism. But here's the thing then, you need an empire. You need land, not just for trade, not just for captive market, for other reasons. So you need a far-flung empire. And that means, like Britain, they're an island. That means you have to go across this crazy thing called water to get to them. And the United States has got its trade across water. And this was at a time, still is, the most efficient way to trade is on water. You can carry more on a boat than you can on land. And so what you need is a navy, and that's what made Britain great. It wasn't their trade. It wasn't necessarily their empire. It's the fact that they had the most powerful navy in the world to protect their empire, to protect their raw materials, to protect their trade. They had an empire. And so if the United States wants to expand trade, remember, they're always thinking west to the lucrative Asian market. They need a navy to protect those trade. If they do not have a strong navy, and therefore bases for that navy, they're going to be at the mercy of other powers. That means at any time, Britain can cut off the trade. Or if other great powers build a powerful navy, they can cut off American trade, and our entire economy, our entire nation will be at their mercy. And we're going to have to go hat in hand to them and beg them not to cut off our trade. Now, this is implying that nations are just these absolute psychopathic entities that will go to war at the drop of a hat. They're not quite that. But that's implying that's what's going to happen. Like, there are reasons for war, but he just said, it doesn't matter, we don't care about reasons. They have a strong navy, they're a threat to our trade. And that's why he pushed for empire, not just for raw materials, but empire for bases. These areas here are islands that the United States would seize in the second half of the 19th century. The United States would take them and make them into coaling stations. The power for the ships at this time was coal. It's going to transition to oil before World War I, but it's coal. Coal is incredibly heavy, so ships can only carry so much. So they need coaling stations. There's nothing in Wake. It's an atoll. There's no water. Same with Midway. There's nothing there. But it's a coaling station. And therefore going to become an important base. Or Hawaii, which we'll get to in a sec. Or for that matter, Guam. Or a Spanish colony called the Philippines. Not only might that be a valuable base to protect American trade in Japan, but it's a massive place. Millions of people, thousands of islands. What a captive market. Spain's weak. Let me do this real fast. Moving on. So Mahan said that, and everybody read Mahan. They loved Mahan. Teddy Roosevelt was just like in awe of Mahan. Would make him an admiral. Rear admiral. Who else read it? What country read Alfred Thayer Mahan's book and said, wow, this is exactly what we've always thought. And this is going to encourage Britain to build even more ships. What other countries? Okay, Russia didn't have the industrial base yet. France had to spend every penny they had for their land arm because they had this really big, powerful country next to them. Who? And then Japan. Germany and Japan. And they would begin to build their fleets fast, influenced by Mahan. Germany building their fleet would make them from kind of an ally to a direct threat to Great Britain. Gee, I wonder what war will come out of that. Britain hated France. Germany hated France. All of a sudden, Britain and France go, oh, we have a common enemy. And then, if Japan is doing the same thing the United States is doing, do you see an issue coming up? I don't know, do you see one? World War II will be a great war for empire. World War II in the Pacific. It's a war for empire. And so with that, Mahan, huge influence. I've read it. It's actually, okay, it's kind of hard to read. And then the other thing he said is this. If there's going to be a battle, he said it's going to be one massive naval battle. This one big battle to decide the entire fate of the war. He kept pushing it. Fleets prepare for a battle. Japan believed their battle. In World War I, both the German and the British fleet kept thinking, okay, we got to save our fleet for one big battle. By the way, we've talked about one big battle, like with the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. Does it happen that way? No, but they all believed it. So with that, huge influence. Yeah. Submarines were just being invented then, and the Germans never really thought much of submarines. But in World War I, because the Royal Navy was bigger, they were forced to start using them. So they're just coming up to U-boats. They're just being invented. They had like kerosene engines, and they had a bad habit to put a lot of carbon monoxide in the U-boat submarine to kill the crew. Yeah, they're really dangerous, but they're just coming. So at that, number three. If we could, did the mouse just go by? There we go. Yeah. If great power, aren't we a great power? And this kind of imperialistic fervor. You know, this I feel it. We got to get a colony. We got to get it. We got to get it. We have to have this. We have to have colonies. We have to have an empire. We're great. The U.S., Britain's great. France is great. We want to be great. They're all making empires. And so this began to fuel this desire of it. And this is a nationalism. Remember, nationalism, in its simplest sense, is we love our country, want our country to be great because why? Yeah, it's our country. You know, patriotism is more, the things we stand for. Nationalism, we just gotta be great. Love it or leave it, it's our country. Here's a joking magazine called Judge. It was supposed to be satire, but a lot of people felt that the world is kind of now going to be divided. The Western Hemisphere, it's ours. British. Here, this is a guy named Cecil Rhodes, who would basically, through unbelievably duplicitous means, take over a bunch of diamond and gold mines in South Africa. He dreamed of a British empire from Cairo to Cape Town, which they would almost get. And here, it's a cartoon of the same, then just a few years later, so this is going into 1912, 1913, of a U.S. empire in the Western Hemisphere. And you notice it's the same model after this. And U.S. bases, etc. And they come close. And the thing was, they looked at the British Empire, and it was like, what made Britain great? Look at this empire. The map is not as bright as I want, so I'll turn the light off. All those areas in red are British colonies. The sun never set on the British Empire. They're great. We should be great too. This is a Mercator projection where they stretch things out. Greenland is not bigger than Africa. This is, see a lot of maps like this. By the way, this is right after World War I, actually. And Britain would get this colony here. They controlled Egypt, so they, for a while, had it. Cairo to Cape Town. And so with that, next. Oh, almost forgot. So this is a cartoon showing Uncle Sam growing. And there's a lot of pictures of Uncle Sam, and he's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, like as the country grew. And they have to get new clothing for him. It was a common joke. It's a baby in 1783. Here's the U.S. getting bigger and bigger, and here's 1899 after the Spanish-American War. And the big thing about this one is not only now here's Uncle Sam now, we're big, we're a powerful country now with a powerful fleet, see the ship? But these are all the great powers in Europe now kind of inviting us into the club. We've made it. But what about the people who live there in those places that we have taken? Oh, social Darwinism. Social Darwinism would justify this. John Fiske was a great follower of Herbert Spencer. And he would write a number of books, including The Hierarchy of Race. And we've talked about this before, this idea of you could label the race. And he listed out 39 different races. And this is one of the plates or illustrations from the book. And it's showing different races. So what they did is they just kind of took people by shade of skin color and said not only is it divided up into races, but a hierarchy. Certain races are lower, certain races are higher. And that's the way it's supposed to be. This is very social Darwinistic. Classes and hierarchy are expected. And so here the race is a man. And you'll notice a couple things about this. First off, this should remind you a little bit of those plates they made with it just beginning back in the 1850s for the positive good theory of slavery. But in the middle, it says Caucasian. By the way, it was a really big debate. What makes you Caucasian or white? And so like there was a big fight in the United States. Is somebody from Turkey white? That was a big fight. Is somebody from Ireland white? And we're just talking about shade of skin color. But if you put in the hierarchy, this is where this is going to become like a huge controversy or an issue. And so here we have Caucasian. And here we have the other races, Mongolian, Ethiopian, American, and Malay. Just, okay. So they're just divvying everybody up. Here's a little place you're going to be, like this, like this. And what do you notice about the Caucasian? She, right? And she's not afraid to look at you. She's looking at you. Not only as the same, but something else too. Yeah.
So this is kind of a multi-part question. So is this in the United States?
Yes, this is U.S. Oh yeah, we're the leaders of this.
Why did they call American and American Indian like East Indian? Because like I feel like they when you start.
Because they're saying they're from Europe. We're from Europe.
They're not Americans yet.
Well, no, people in the United States call them Americans, but not the race. But we're talking race.
So the Americans were American.
Yeah, that's an American race. Remember, they're just slightly different color skin. We're going to categorize you. There is kind of a human desire to categorize things, but this is like we're going to get different levels. And then look at them. What do you notice about them? First off, what are they? Men. Are they looking at you? No, they're kind of leering off, not looking directly at you. Aren't they dark? Remember I told you about dark would become more and more uncivilized and dangerous. This comes from slavery. And what about her? What are we supposed to think about her at that moment? Let me ask it differently. Is she sick? She is surrounded by potential enemies. It's implying, look at those. They're leering, they're dark, they're dangerous. So it's not just she, it's the race is in danger. And if we don't do something about it, this is where they start talking about race mixing a lot. And the term we will come back to is called eugenics, to make sure that we keep that race pure. And yes, it started in the United States. Some people would really like that idea. So with that, we combine that. We're vulnerable unless we make sure that we stay on top like we're supposed to. That's what we as an American, the Americans that are a certain color of skin. And then white man's burden. And this comes from a poem called Rudyard Kipling. It's called White Man's Burden. He wrote this poem justifying English colonization of India. And what it said is the burden of white man, because they're on top, either to civilize or fall victim to the savages. So this is a cartoon to justify American control of Cuba. And that's Teddy Roosevelt, who would become famous in the war for fighting against, or for raising a regiment of volunteers in the war, charging up San Juan Hill, which I'll have to get to on Monday. But here he is, and this is him in Cuba. And that's a Cuban. And he's carried him to a schoolhouse. And that represents civilization. But look at the Cuban. Look how they drew the Cuban. Does that remind you of pictures I've shown you before? Remember the pictures either to justify slavery or after it for Jim Crow? Isn't that the same face? Is that exactly the same? So we're trying to justify conquest because if we don't, this savage will be in charge. This is going to be used over and over and over again. And it is our duty to civilize. And it's going to be a hard fight. And we can lose this fight, as shown by the dead soldier. And so it is our duty, or we're going to lose everything. A really popular book. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, they're trying to show him as a savage. And that was the idea of a savage or like a headhunter. Yeah. They're supposed to be, I don't know if that's hair or feathers. I really don't know. But it's our duty or we're in trouble. This was a really popular book. In fact, this is kind of making a comeback today, which is kind of fascinating to me in a dark and scary way. The Rising Tide of Color, implying that there's a threat to, this was a really popular book from 1910. At the same time, the passing of a great race. This was not as popular, but this was a really well-known idea. They're telling white people, we as white people don't do this, we're going to be in trouble. And they are coming. There's a lot of they. This would go on in advertising. Paris soap was just becoming kind of manufactured soap was becoming a big deal. They found ways to make it by economies of scale. Paris used to be a big company. It is rolled into ivory soap, which is another fascinating thing. So first off, this is Commodore Dewey, who would lead the American fleet in the Manila Bay during the Spanish-American War. And it says, the first step towards lightening the white man's burden is through teaching of the virtues of cleanliness, implying we'll come and teach the savages how to be clean. This will be a common trope. I'll show you another one. Here, though, is another Paris soap, and this one is shocking. But they have a little soap, and this will become more white, implying civilized. This was not uncommon. Remember what I told you, all around the world, this was the most racist time. And so, how do you justify conquering other people? They're not really civilized. It's our duty. So, naturally, this can only lead to one thing. Is the chicken encouraging the kid to smoke? I mean, that's a valid question, right? Or is the kid forcing the chicken to breathe in secondhand smoke? No one's good here, right? Look at that kid. You know what's going to happen to that kid. That's a young Al Capone. Okay, I made that up. No. But this can only mean one thing. I know what you're thinking. It's time to write a thesis. Okay, so drop your paper. Let's write a thesis statement. So remember X, that's the taking the main point of the prompt or question. Y, sometimes your position, basically how you're going to combine something that combines all three. And it's something very basic. Something very basic about imperialism. And then A, B, and C are the three main topics. And those would be the ones that you use for your topic sentences, for your body paragraphs. I gave you lots of them. Okay, fine. Imperialism, what does that create? What kind of attitude does that create in America? I'm filming this, so this is going to be really exciting viewing for somebody. And the important thing about this is I tell you about, there are reasons there's going to be some complexities around the world that people might look to colonial powers and think something about them. Yeah. Go back and look at it, make sure you have a good X, have a Y, you have your 3 points. Very good. Very good. Got one? Got one? And think about which ones. I gave you one of my guesses, you're all going to choose one. I literally just said it. Everyone have a good A, B, and C? All right, so we got it? So I want you to do now. Just finish up the last bit. Okay. Everybody look to the person to your, no, let's go right behind you. Just go exchange it with the person right behind you or right next to you. Just take a quick look at it. See if you can identify the A, B, and C, the X, and I know the Y is the hardest part. Something that ties it all together. Just take a look at it, however you want to do it. Just take a look at it. Can you see it? My guess is you're going to log the same thing. I heard someone else say, I heard someone over here say, we got about the same thing. That's fine. The thing about an essay like this, you're not looking for perfection. It's got to be very utilitarian. Take a strong position, address the question, tell me where you're going with it. Don't mess around. No one wants to show you yours?
No, I don't care.
It's good. I mean, if you look at this, do you know what they're going to write? That's the big thing. The thing about a thesis is, I know you missed, but the thing about a thesis, you want to tell the person reading it where you're going. It helps grading so much. They will feel good about you and want to give you a good grade. It's not me. I'm honored. But everybody else, normal people. So, how do we do it? Who read one that was so good, it literally and arguably changed your life? Who did you read?
I read
Right, let's hear it. Oh, no, I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, that's it. I would have made, but social Darwin included this, that. But yeah, that works exactly right. And you have, I can see where you're going. Good job. There's another one. That would like to read. Anybody else want to volunteer to read their thesis statement? I love when I say that and everyone immediately looks down. That's one of my favorite things in the world. Any volunteers? Oh, I'm just, chopping wood over here. I don't know what's going on. Who else would like to read theirs? Anybody? Should I just randomly pick somebody?
Absolutely not.
Huh? Thank you for volunteering. Thank you, let's hear it. I like it.
The United States justified imperialism going into the 19th century through
Don't worry if there's a word off.
police values. I have to read that loud and then we're using racism through social Darwinists thinking John Fisk, and then through his thinking the hierarchy of races, the white man's burden, and the fierce social.
Okay, the only problem with that is they're all social Darwinists.
They are. Okay.
Yeah, all three of them are social Darwinism.
Okay.
So I know, I mean, it's good. The organization was good. It's just that you're going to be repeating yourself into. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so maybe if you did like Penny of 1893 and Alfred Thayer Mahan.
Okay.
What?
Like, what would your why be?
Well, the why. The thing about the why is, what does the U.S. want to create? An empire. Yeah. The United States wants an empire. What do you create an empire for? For profit, for money. Yeah. That's your why. All these things are for empire. That's it. The why, or you say nationalism. Yeah. Want to get one more? Anybody? Anybody? Kill readers, letters.
All right. American imperialism made the country more nationalistic because it tries to will house as moving trade into a building dignity and increase form of civilization and colonization.
Yeah, that works. Very good. You mentioned nationalism. You got 3 points. I know exactly where you're going. Good job. The why, just something to tie those A, B, and C together. And it doesn't need to be earth-shattering. Just something to tie it together to show that you're thinking about making a fluid essay. You want to see my? You excited? This will change lives. I made it 2 sentences. I really put the nationalist. To me, it's nationalism, economics, but that's empire. I could have just wrote empire, what is the same thing, really. And this is kind of a lot of people I have this. And if I was writing this essay, first body paragraph, Panic of 1893. Second body paragraph, Mahan. Third body paragraph, am I close? Social Darwinism. Sound good? Did a lot of people have those same 3 things? Or at least 2 of them, probably? Yeah, it's really tough. So like, here's good format. It becomes easy to repeat yourself. I would do what we all did and try to make sure they're separate enough so you're not saying the same thing. Well, good job. All right. So on that happy note, let's get to kind of the test case. Hawaii. Hawaii would show all of this in action. So Hawaii became an important place in the middle of the Pacific, actually for whaling ships. But in 1849, the United States kind of coerced the king of Hawaii, it was a monarchy, into making it a protectorate. We're in a race. Britain wanted to make it a protectorate too, aka the Sandwich Islands. So we basically made it part of our economic empire. I should add, they basically slaughtered all the whales here. And this was the center of whaling operations. And they would go on these journeys where they would literally be gone for 5 years. So they'd leave Newport, Rhode Island, and go all the way around and do the whaling up here. And the U.S. wanted Hawaii for a whaling station so they could spend the winter someplace. Same reason the U.S. would try to get Japan opened up. It's for whaling, ironically. Well, expats. Expats is a term for expatriates. So these are citizens of the United States, got a little bit of money, most of them, and they immigrate to Hawaii. Hawaii is an independent country. And they started scooping up the land for sugar and pineapple plantations. Pineapples are going to become like this just magical export or import to the United States. Pineapples from Hawaii. If you could afford a pineapple, that was a real sign of wealth. They're like pineapple wallpaper. I mean, it became a big deal, pineapples. And you still see this with you get kind of island themes. There'll be pineapples all over. It's a legacy of pineapples. And by the way, pineapples will last for a couple months after they're cut. They'll slowly but surely begin to ripen, and so you can get relatively fresh pineapples in the U.S. And if you've ever had a truly fresh pineapple, it's life-changing. Yeah, pineapple's good stuff. And if you get a pineapple that's fresh, dug out of the ground, oh, amazing. That's how they grow them around Miles City. They're like potatoes. You grow them underground, and is that how you grow pineapple? No, it's on a tree. Has anyone ever had a pineapple fresh cut off a tree? It's kind of amazing. And pineapple's great in the store, let alone that. Okay, I like pineapple. Did you catch that? Imagine a pineapple Kit Kat. They have those in Japan. So, by 1890, most of the best land for sugar or pineapple were owned by, I call them U.S. planters, but these are citizens of the United States who immigrated to Hawaii. I should add, remember the whole thing about Mexico and Texas? When Americans immigrated someplace, what did they bring with them? They brought with them the flag. They still thought of themselves as Americans. And so they own the land. So these are the Hawaiians who are working as laborers in these crops. Well, in the 1890s, a new monarch. So this is not a democratic republic or constitutional monarchy. This is the monarch. Queen Liliuokalani. There's the queen right there. And she wanted to do something about what was becoming of the mass poverty of Hawaiians, because most of them were day laborers in these big plantations. These were Hawaiians. And by the way, they also included a bunch of Japanese immigrants into there, but that's another story. And it's going to be called land reform. And what the queen wants to do is, as she saw it, and there's some element of truth to there, a lot of people kind of got swindled out of their land. And so the thought was the government will force the planters to sell their land to the government, and then the government would give it to Hawaiian peasants, the people now who are day laborers working on the plantation. So that's her plan. So the money and the wealth stays there, because she did not trust the planters. She just assumed they're either going to send the money back to the United States, which a lot of them were, or something else. So that's Queen Liliuokalani. So she's really going against the planters. And they immediately saw this as a major threat to their operation. They saw her as a massive enemy. So here's a cartoon in support of the U.S. immigrant planters, and it really pushes the idea that there's decadent native rule. This is what happens when you allow them to rule. And this is a cartoon from an American newspaper showing Queen Liliuokalani. See it right here? And it's implying that she only is in government because of the power of the United States, with the U.S. with a tiny little army, but the fleet is growing. And it says gross immorality, scandalous government. And what's a scandalous government? That Hawaii for the Hawaiians. And look at her face. Isn't that exactly the face I showed you before? It's just a little bit neater version of the same face that Teddy Roosevelt was carrying up, the exact same thing. And so using this kind of hierarchy of race to say, just look at her, she can't govern. I mean, look at her feet. They made these massive feet. I mean, this whole thing to say that this is the kind of government we're going to have if we don't do something about it. And so there's going to be a revolution in Hawaii. 1890, do you remember the McKinley Tariff? Well, that put a tariff on all goods from this mountain valley. The tariff put a tax on sugar. Not pineapple, but sugar. And this was to protect sugar in Louisiana. So they wanted annexation. If Hawaii's annexed by the United States, they won't have to pay a tariff. So they want to be annexed to avoid the tariff, and they're mad about land reform. So in 1893, the planters would organize a coup, which is overthrowing the government and putting in a government they want. They want to stop her, kick her out, take over for the United States, and to protect them. And this is no doubt what they were doing. Now, they had paid for a pretty well-armed militia made up of expats. Well-armed. And there was a U.S. naval squadron in Maui. Oahu actually wasn't that big where Honolulu is. Maui was actually bigger than, a combination of many reasons. Well, Marines are naval infantry. Every ship had Marines. The local commander sent the Marines and U.S. ships to overthrow and arrest the Queen. President Cleveland did not order this. He did not support this, but he didn't know this was happening. This was before there was a telegraph line. I should add, they had already done an underwater telegraph line from New York to London. but it hadn't gone this way yet. So Cleveland had no idea this was going on. In the future, it wouldn't be that way. But the Queen, you can imagine, she assumed the United States is invading. This is going to lead to great bloodshed. And she would be arrested and spend the rest of her life under house arrest. And they created a new country. This should remind you of California in 1846. Sanford Ballard Dole. That's him with the beard. You like the beard? That's a beard. He created the Republic of Hawaii, going to be annexed. Yes, his plantation, eventually a corporation, would take that name. And at second period, when I study all, I ate a Dole banana. And so, would the United States annex it? Well, Cleveland said no. President Cleveland said, this goes against American values. We fought against imperialism during the Revolutionary War, and now we're going to become just like them. What would the United States become? Warlike, bases all over the world, fighting everywhere, secret government spies, have a good weekend. So he didn't annex it. And so Hawaii would be this weird kind of propped up republic controlled by U.S. planters, with the Queen under house arrest. And then a war happened. McKinley's the new president, and in the euphoria of the victory of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. annexed Hawaii. And so here's making Dole the territorial governor of the new U.S. colony, call it territory, Hawaii. See the beard? And here shows a cartoon of the U.S. checkmating Britain. That's John Bull. They're playing chess for Hawaii. And look at the face of Hawaii. You see the face? Are we going to let them, these people, rule it? Much more civilized will rule it. And so the Hawaiian Islands is going to be an American colony. In 1959, it will become the 49th state. And so when Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, they were attacking an American colony. It's a big war for empire. We will get to that, obviously. Thus the Spanish-American War. We roll right up to setting this war up. And this war has a lot of elements of the Mexican-American War. Remember I told you about Uncle Sam getting heavier? Look at this cartoon. There's Uncle Sam, and this is McKinley. What is he doing? What is he? What occupation is he? He's a tailor. So fitting for a new suit because we're growing, and it has like Texas, Louisiana Purchase, all the way to Puerto Rico, Hawaii. Yep, Hawaii. And it says, enlightened foreign policy, rational expansion. Is this for or against an American empire? Yeah, it's for. Implying that we're not doing it for any reason other than enlightened, civilized reasons. Well, there was an independence movement in Cuba. Last thing for today. Which we will be the first thing for tomorrow. Monday. I'm going to give you Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday off. Except for, you know, that you're reading the Bible. So, thank you, Mr. President. Have a good weekend. Yeah. Have a good weekend. Run with my work. And hang by your thumb. Now, you look out for that great ball. We might get another animal. Quick feet? Folklore, okay. Queen?
Yeah.
It's all yours. My arm hard. I don't know. Just got out of the room.
I love it. And not Loki, looks like him.
Oh.
Loki, I'm gonna make one of these. It's gonna be about you.